I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Philip Jordan. Everyone knows Phil. He's, I'm sure, got a very entertaining program for us.
I'm going to sit most of the time because I have a back that gives me some problems, and I think everyone can hear me okay? Okay. Well, I have talked, 4 times before on my paper route, St. Mark's Church and the Millstream and working at Johnny's Market, all those things. And through the decades, I've gotten to know quite a few people that have come and gone. And being the funeral director, I've helped them go. And so they asked me to talk again, so I thought, well, I may repeat myself on some things, but I thought, let's talk about some of the Candor notables and notorious. Okay, so I don't know if you categorize yourself in one or the other, but if you do, please stand up when I mention your name. When I grew up, Candor was a bustling community. Candor had everything you ever needed. We had a place to learn to swim at the old dam, the wooden dam. We had bicycles. You could ride the streets and feel safe. You could go out at night and play kick the can, hide and seek or whatever, and not have to worry about a thing. Things have changed. And I thought, how am I going to work with the notables of Candor? And I thought, well, one of the way I know all the notables is because of some of the businesses that were in Candor. So I sat today and made a list of some of the businesses that were in Candor, and I want to read that list, and then I'm going to go back through and name some of the people that I've met through those things, and I have a couple stories you might find interesting. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I do not change the names to protect the innocent. Some of you may remember Dragnet. That was, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, not in Candor. No one's innocent. So I started out with, and what I came up with was, I think, 48 businesses that have come and gone, and 12 churches that have been a part of our lives. And that's just out of what memory I have, which is small. I have to tell you an amusing story. Monday, I had to go for blood test for my annual checkup. So I had a glowing report. Everything was good. My sugar was down, and I was feeling good, and had injections in my knees, and I felt like I was 17 again. And I was just really enjoying looking at my report online, and just finished that, and 10 minutes later, the monument service called and said, Phil, your monument is done and can be placed in the cemetery on Thursday. I said, oh, well, okay, I'll meet you there on Thursday. I'll be standing up, I hope. So I think God speaks to us in many different ways. Don't get too arrogant, Phil, you're going to die someday. But I want to go over some of the bars and restaurants first. The Brush and Palette Restaurant, which was run by Lee and Clara Jane. The Millstream Inn, which was originally run by Fred and Angelina Embody, then Ralph and Marie Ahart, then Janny and Arnie Redsicker. Then there was the Rendezvous Bar and Grill, which earlier was called, I believe, the White Elephant. Then it became My Brother's Place, the Village Bar and Grill, Dip's Place, Punk's Place, and etc. Then just down the road here and across was the Doha Lee Restaurant, run by Dorothy, Hattie, and Lee and Dennis. And they had a little cabin out back that looked more like a tool shed, but you could actually rent the cabin and stay there. I don't know as any local people did, but they knew better. So then we had the Fountain Inn, which everyone in high school went over to the Fountain Inn. run by Harry Stead, and that was the place where kids went for lunch hour if they got a pass to do so. The Loft Restaurant. Then some of the other businesses, the American Legion, the old Legion was across from the Ball Diamond, great big house there, and that was an interesting house. It was huge to my little eyes, and so then the old Legion moved to the new Legion, which was the building that Fred Nicholson built for engineering business. And so that's where it is today. I got thinking about, there was down by where the village chapel is, Johnny's new store went in there, and now it's the village chapel. But there was a small building there that was the Pepsi distribution center. And it was run by Kenny Marsh. And Kenny Marsh had a real claim to fame as a musician. And he had a country band that was called Kenny Marsh and the Diamond Valley Ramblers. Some of you may or may not remember Kenny Marsh. I don't have his autograph, which I wish I did. I can't get it now. But his claim to fame, and this is no lie, he played on the Ralph Carroll Show on Channel 12 in Binghamton. And I saw it myself when I was a kid. So that's Kenny Marsh's claim to fame. And Phyllis Dell was one of his distributors. And their daughter Patty was born, I think, 2 days ahead of me and my sister Phyllis. And why they intrigued me is his name was Phil and my name was Phil. His twin sister was named Phyllis, and my twin sister was named Phyllis. Going back to some of the, I love to reminisce, so these businesses take me back. There's Miller's Funeral Home, which became Manzer's, Alan Manzer Funeral Home. Century Cleaners with John Stickles, some of you remember that. The Candor Courier with Arthur Beebe, and later on Bob Fox. Then the GLF, which was the, they've redone the building beautifully over behind, it's Zavato's house, okay, yes. And that was the preview to Agway, was the GLF, was the preview to Agway. Then there was Wardman Scoy's Feed Mill. Cardwell's Freezer Plant, do any of you remember that? That was on Smith Street, across from the funeral home. The gal that was the physician assistant at Candor, Connie Naughton, lived there. And it's right next door to there, and their home at one point was a Nazarene church for a very brief time period before they built in Owego. Then we had two barber shops, Silvestro's barber shop, where there was Pete, Old Pete, and Young Pete. Young Pete was really named Everett, but we always called him Young Pete and Old Pete. And my brother and I would fight over who was going to get Old Pete or Young Pete. And I usually won because I was the oldest. Because Old Pete was still cutting hair when he was around 127 years old. And he would get those clippers and come at you like this. And the clippers weren't bad because they didn't cut. But when he finished up with the scissors, that's when you worried. The ears and the jugular vein, you always worried about that. The other end of town was another barber, John Marks, and he had a shop right in by the old fire station, right by Red and White, the Red and White store on the corner. Then there was the laundromat, which Adrian Shove owned. He was from Ithaca, and then it became Quick's Laundromat, and so that's been there a long time. And I think as I was a child, at one point for a brief time, there was an ice cream place in there.
Schrader's had a diner in there.
Who did?
Schrader's.
Okay, I didn't know that, but But anyway, and then there was an ice cream place, and then it became the laundromat. And I remember there was quite a turmoil there because kids would go in there and they had the old Pepsi machines where the bottles were held up by the neck of the bottle, and they could go in with a straw, take their can opener, pop the top, take their straw and have a drink. So the next person that would come in to buy a soda got an empty bottle. So that's sort of the way that went. And then there was Borden's Creamery, which was across from the laundromat where Quick Cement place is now, concrete place. And I lived down on Humiston Street, so every morning you could hear the whistle on the creamery go, and you'd hear the train come to a stop there, and all the cans, you could hear the farmers unloading cans. They'd go up and go into the building, and then the empties would come out of the building and be put on a platform for them to pick back up, back when they delivered milk before there was the big trucks to pick up the milk. It was delivered by can. And there was the people that sort of ran the creamery were Chaffees, and my Aunt Helen's mother, Ethel Harris, worked there, and she could throw 2 or 3 cans at a time. She was a rugged woman, and you never crossed Ethel. She was a babysitter for my friends Jerry and Fred Ahart, and when she babysat for them, all the kids on the street behaved at the fear of death. She had a parrot that could swear better than any man, okay, and I think she must have taught the parrot everything it knew, okay. One of the first times I ever saw a deceased person was Ethel Harris, and she was laid out in a small bedroom in her home on Foundry Street, and I thought, why isn't she getting up? We're here, you know, and I was only probably 6 or 7 years old, but that's one of the first times I ever saw a deceased person. Second time I ever saw a deceased person was my Uncle Bob died. That was my father's brother, and Uncle Bob lived in a small, it was actually a chicken coop done over into a little house that was behind the laundromat, right next to the house is gray now, it was red shingle, and there was a shoe cobbler that lived in that house. His name was Peter, but I can't think of his last name. And my uncle lived next door, and he had dementia quite bad, and the kids picked on him terrible. But when he died at the nursing home. Candor had a nursing home, Scoutons Nursing Home. He died there, and my twin sister and I went to calling hours, and it was a very bad winter night. It was in January, and we didn't want to go in. We were all very, very nervous, and he was laid out so you could see the casket as you walked in the front door. And I remember saying to my sister, I says, "That's Uncle Bob, because I can see his nose sticking up over the edge of the casket, because he had a big nose," and that was him. And so it was Uncle Bob, all right. And so Phyllis and I said, Phyllis kept saying, "Can we go? Can we go? Can we go?" She was anxious to get out for fear she'd be laying down someplace. And my mother says, "Yes, you can walk home." And it was a very cold night, and we just got across the bridge by the mill stream, and a hay truck came across and took the turn at the end of the bridge and tipped over, and all the hay fell off just behind us. So Phyllis believed, and I believed, that the death angel was walking behind us on the way home from Miller's funeral home. Then we had also the Highway Dairy Bar, which is still here. I think that was built in the 50s. Myron Bezushko, and Irene Benson, who were brother and sister. And everyone, all the kids were scared to death of Irene Benson because we were certain she didn't like kids and that, you know, that she was just sort of a bit of a tyrant type person. And she, what do you kids want? You know, and so we tell them we got our ice cream. And I have a good story about that in a while. Then we had Vernon Scope as a business with Donnie Yar selling telescopes all over the world. Norm Galpin Trucking, some of you may remember that Norm Galpin had a dump truck and sat outside of his house, and he'd always put the dump part up so the rain wouldn't rust the truck, and kids in the neighborhood after dark would go and throw stones in that truck just to hear the noise of the truck, and then he'd come to the door and the kids would run away, and I couldn't run as fast as some of them, but and Leo Yires did plumbing and did things like that. Then we had Phil King Insurance, Butterfield Insurance, and John Tompkins had insurance. Daisy Jennings had an insurance company and sold insurance when I was a kid, and she was a tough person to deal with. If you didn't pay your premium on time, you were done for. That was the way. Then we had a couple doctors. Well, first there was Dr. Moulton that everybody loved, and his wife Nellie, who did all his fighting for him, and she'd walk ahead of him and clear the path for Doc Moulton. And then came Dr. John Jakes and his wife Hildegard Mahler, and some of you may remember them. I remember one time I went up to Craig's, and Lynn was a little girl at the time. She was about 10, 12 years old. And Dr. Jakes had some notoriety, and Carrie Weber, who lived on the first house on the right on Kinney Street after the corner house, she had died that day. And I go into Craig's house and Lynn says, Carrie Weber died today. And I said, oh, she did? Yeah, Doc Jakes came, gave her a shot, and she was dead in 10 minutes. Some of you may have similar stories. The Candor telephone office, which was where I think their equipment place is now. There was a house next to that, and then next was LaGrange's hardware store, and next was Ellis's drugstore, and next was Kilpatrick's variety store, and next was the beauty parlor that Marion Weber, I think, was the first one in there. Then the Fountain Inn, and then the train depot with the library in it, and that was that side of the street. And the hardware store burned to the ground one night, and the telephone office became from Candor Telephone Company to Continental Telephone Company to Contel, and now, I guess, whatever. So, that's that. And one guy that I want to mention that was really essential to Candor at the time was Sharfie, who was the repair person for everything. You call him, my washing machine isn't working, he'd come fix it. You need a new window in, he'd come fix it. And he and Nita lived where you live now, where Rita lives now. And Sharfie was sort of a godsend to the community at that time. He just was the go-to person for that. Churches that I've listed is Ellen Memorial Baptist Church, McKendree Methodist Church, the Congregational Church, St. Mark's Episcopal Church, the Nazarene Church, the Wilseyville Baptist Church, the Catatonia Baptist Church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Catatonia, St. Francis Catholic, and Kingdom Hall of the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is now Pet Passages, which is the place for the crematory if you have a deceased pet. And being an ordained minister, I find it interesting that that is very well used. A lot of people use that to have their pets cremated. And I've done 4 funerals there for pets, from dogs and cats and things that, and the girl that runs it, Wendy, is just a wonderful person. So that's that. We had 4 grocery stores: Johnny's Market, the IGA, run by Sandy's parents, the DuPois. And then we had Craig's Market Basket, which was Diane's grandparents. That was on the corner of, is it Ann Street? Jackson, okay. And that was on the corner there. And Winston Ives had a law office in the other half of that. So that was, Diane's grandparents ran that. And then Hollenbeck's Red and White, which is the brick house on the corner across from the veterinarians. LaGrange's Hardware, Kilpatrick's Variety Store, Ellis's Drug Store, gas stations. We had all kinds of gas stations. We had Don Ackles Esso Station, which is where Marabido is. Ralph Twilliger, Twiggs Texaco Station. Glenn and Lillian Francis's, it was an Atlantic station, then it went to Arco, and now it's the Dandy. Owen Schooley's Garage and TV store is there, which I loved because that was the day you could, if you had your TV go bad, you could just open the back of it out, take out the tubes that were bad and go test them, and buy a new tube there, take it back, put it in, you were back in business. And wouldn't that be nice to have that nowadays, that we could do that? I've been trying to program a scanner that I bought for the last 2 days, and not doing one. Then where the loft was over here was Tony Squarrow had a garage there. And he also owned where the Village Bar and Grill is, Tony's. And so that was there. Then in Catatunk was Joe Charles Golf Station. Some of you may remember that.
Hubbardtown.
Yes, in Hubbardtown. I said Catatunk, didn't I? Yes. Spoken by a woman from Hubbardtown who corrects everything I say anyway. So. And then Morris's Garage is where the doctor's office is. That was a garage there. And what I loved about those places, Morris's and Glenn and Lillian Francis, the women worked right along with their husbands. They changed oil, they were grease monkeys, they changed tires, they did everything. And they dressed like men. Lillian always wore jeans, but she always wore sturdy Oxford high heel shoes. And she had red hair right up until the day she died. She dyed her hair red. And Glenn was quite a character. Glenn did a lot of interesting things to people around town. He was always quite a jokester as far as that goes. There was a Bonnie Ayers, who had cerebral palsy and always dragged a cart around with him. And he'd walk up to the Lyons Brother farm to get milk, and then he'd go over to Glenn and Lillian's garage, and they sort of looked out for Bonnie. And it was, they did good by him, but he was always doing things. And Glenn, I think, wanted to upset Eudora, Bonnie's mother, so he had a big box that he had supplied in the bathrooms at the gas station. He had supplied a thing on the wall for women's feminine napkins. So he took the empty box and put it on Bonnie's cart so Bonnie could take that home to Eudora. And Eudora got a little upset with that, I think. And Kay and I were talking about how one night they were out for a ride and they were up in the hills, and Glenn says, "Stop the car!" And it was a moonlit night, and there was a donkey out in the field, and he jumped over the fence, Glenn did, and got on the back of the donkey and rode through the fields at midnight, and had a great time with that. Then there was Cavatile's Farm Equipment Store, which was where the ambulance garage is, and there was 3 brothers that ran the farm equipment store, Jimmy, Paul, and Tom. And Jimmy was a little short fella, as I remember, short and stocky, and they ran that farm equipment store because everybody was a farmer back then, and did a good business there. And we had Whitcomb's coal business, and Whitcomb's lived in the house just past the loft that's green. They've done a beautiful job painting that house. And Whitcomb's would come and deliver coal, and usually early on Saturday mornings, and it seemed like it was an hour that the coal was running down the metal chute into the coal bin while I was trying to sleep. And I guess they didn't realize that us kids like to sleep. The First National Bank of Candor, which became Tioga State Bank, that was where the library is. And Mr. Wells was the president of that bank, and he and his wife lived in the house across from the Episcopal Church, next to Jennings's that sat in back. And I think of them at Halloween, because when we went there for Halloween, they had a player organ that they would have us kids in and do that player organ like it was a ghost playing the organ, you know. But it was really interesting to see that. So that was, then the library and the train depot. When I think of the library, I have to think of Dorcas Beebe. Dorcas Beebe was Art Beebe's wife. Art Beebe ran the Courier, Candor Courier, and Dorcas had long gray hair that she pinned up behind her. She was always dressed in dark colors, usually black, and she rode a bicycle from her home on Church Street to the library, and she had a little dog, and the dog would sit in the fruit basket on the back of the bicycle, and her and the dog would come to the library. And I remember one summer that I read the whole series of the Hardy Boys books, and she helped me pick out the Hardy Boys book. And I'd see her ride that bicycle with the dog in the back, and I have never watched The Wizard of Oz without thinking of Dorcas Beebe riding to the library with her little dog, because it was just like the woman, and she looked like the woman in The Wizard of Oz. Not that she was a witch, but, well, I don't know. John Stickles' place, several people worked in John Stickles' place. I think, did Arlene Gillette work there, I think, at one time? But she worked at the Courier office, too. Every time you'd walk by John Stickles, they had pressed everything, and out would come this steam out across the sidewalk, and you always thought, well, I'm going to be burned quite badly with this, but it wasn't hot, but it was always came out across the sidewalk, scared you right to death. And the one thing that I have to talk about is the Dohali restaurant. Some of you may remember that. Run by Dorothy and Hattie and Leanne. Dohali. Or out-of-towners called it Do-Hal Inn. And that's the one with, well, Dorothy had one tooth right here. And she might have had one up here too. But I always think of her when we had a song that we sang in school that reminded me of Dorothy. And it was Catalina, Magdalena, Hoopensteiner, Wallendiner, Hogan, Logan, Bogan was her name. She had 2 teeth in the roof of her mouth, one pointed north and the other pointed south. Catalina, Magdalena, Hoopensteiner, Wallendiner, Hogan, Logan, Bogan was her name. And that's what I thought of Dorothy then. And so I don't know if any of you remember that or not, but that song always reminds me of that, as far as that goes. The Highway Dairy Bar. Irene Benson had a birthmark on the side of her face, and she always wore her hair pinned up, and she was tough. She was all business. She was tough. Somehow they were connected to Simcoe's, who lived over on Simcoe Road at the last house on Simcoe Road. I don't know who lives there now.
Carol and Lee Foster.
Who?
Carol and Lee Foster have a place back there.
Oh, Carol and Lee Foster. Well, I was very close friends with Rosie Olmsted, and we went to bingo 3 or 4 nights a week, Rosie and I did. Well, one night we got a call that about 5 o'clock, we always left around 5:30, and Mrs. Simcoe had, her husband had died, and he was sitting on the edge of the bed, and when he died, he fell on her. And she had laid there most of the day, and she was in very bad shape. Dr. Jake said that she couldn't lay down on a stretcher to go in the ambulance. She would have to sit up and go in a car. So Rosie calls me and says, "Be on the corner of Church Street, I gotta pick you up, we gotta take Mrs. Simcoe to the hospital." And I says, "What's wrong?" "I guess she's dying." And I thought, I'm gonna ride with someone dying to Waverly, because that's where we were going to the bingo. And so we went over there, and they loaded her in the car, and Rosie's daughter Jackie and I sat in the back seat, and they were Polish people, and Rosie was Polish, and she could understand some Polish, and Mrs. Simcoe was sort of mumbling. And so she started mumbling, and I said to Rosie, "What is she saying?" "She's speaking Polish." I says, "I know, but what is she saying?" She says, "She's saying the Hail Marys, I think she's leaving." And so scared right to death we were, and so she's saying her Hail Marys all the way to the hospital. We get to the hospital, and go down around to the ambulance entrance, and 2 nurses come out and put her in a wheelchair, and she was really in bad shape. She was really in bad shape. Her daughter, Catherine, was supposed to come down and admit her to the hospital, but she hadn't gotten there yet, and the nurse says, "Well, you can leave the car here, and will you come in and admit her?" And Rosie says, "Her daughter's on the way, I'm late for bingo." And she says, so we left her in a cloud of dust and went to bingo. So Rosie and I would get in more trouble doing those things, and I think we hit 3 or 4 deer on the way to bingo through the years. I went with her for quite a few years, and I told this story before when I spoke, but Rosie loved bingo, and if she didn't have a car, she'd borrow someone's car to go. And she worked cleaning for Phil and Betty King. And Phil had a Saab, which at that time was an unknown car in the Candor area. It was, what are they, Swedish, I think. And it was a Saab, and the shifting was sort of the opposite. It was on the column, but it was sort of the opposite of the American-made cars. And Rosie couldn't drive it very well. And so she finally got it going, and we went around the corner in Vanette and headed to Waverly, and it stalled out on her. She got going too slow, it was in 3rd gear, stalled out on her. She pulled over, and she couldn't get it going. She would get that going, and it sounded like a Singer sewing machine. And she'd rev that up to as high as it would go. Pop the clutch, and it'd stall out. stall out. She says, Philip, you're gonna have to get this. You're gonna have to get us going. And I says, I can't drive, I'm only 14 years old, I can't drive in New York State. You're gonna have to, it's an emergency, and they won't say anything. And I says, well, they will. I can't drive. She says, all right, you get it going, and when we get it going, you go over the back of the front seat, and I will slide over and take over, and we'll get there. I says, we can't do that. Oh, yes, we can. So I got it going, and just before we go up the hill in Venetton, I went over the back of the front seat. Rosie slid over and kept her foot on the gas, and we got going. And we made it to bingo just in time. So that was fun. And Rosie had 3 boys, Mike, George, and Chuck Pompelli, who were the Hellraisers in Candor for a long time. And they tormented our police department, which was Jake Haig. And Jake Haig was about this tall. And he was a great guy, and they would torment him, race by him and get him to chase after him, and he totaled his car up on Leg Hill Road chasing them. And Jake Haig, one of the things I loved about Jake Haig is I was in the junior play, and I was a police officer in the junior play, and they asked Jake if I could wear his uniform, and I graduated, I weighed 122 pounds, and his uniform fit me perfectly. But I could not have his gun belt until the night of the play. And can you imagine now letting a kid take a gun belt to the junior play? But I did. I had his gun and gun belt in the junior play, and Jake let me have it, but I had to bring it back right the next morning because he might have needed it to squelch some of the crime in Candor. So, and those boys tormented them terrible. And then Rosie had 6 others, I think 5 girls and a boy after that with Jack Olmsted. So Rosie did a wonderful job for the kids in Candor at collecting money to make sure there was a beach at the dam and the diving board and a raft where you could go out on the raft, and some of the older boys like Pete Shaler and Johnny Tompkins and all those would rock that raft and get it going so high that how I learned to swim is they threw me off the dam, and the people were getting up the ladder, and I had to doggy paddle as fast as I could to try to stay above water and so I learned to doggy paddle right then and there because it was over my head. Rosie did a wonderful job with the dam and making sure kids, a lot of people my age know how to swim because of the dam. And it's a shame that the dam had to go out because at the time that went out, there was only 2 wooden dams in the state of New York. And there was one over around Glens Falls, I think, and then the one we had. And they repaired it many, many years. And if you were really bold, you went under the dam, but you always saw a water snake under there. So I don't like water snakes, so I didn't go under the dam at all. You know, it was a little too scary for me as far as that goes. But that's where Larry Hines taught swimming classes there. And no matter how cold it was, we had to get in the water. And getting in the water up to your waist was a little rough for us boys. But anyway, so that's where we learned to swim. And that was all part of growing up in Candor. And it was a wonderful time that we had. I think that when we think of the people in this town that have crossed our paths, it's amazing how many people have touched our lives in a very special way. The churches, I remember the ministers stayed forever, it seemed. The Methodist minister, Emerford Freelove, he was there, what,
12 years.
12 years. Father Giles was only there 6 years, but Mr. Mosley was at the Congregational Church, and Irving Klein, he was there forever. His wife was my kindergarten teacher, Beulah Klein, and the first day of school, I never took a nap in my life, and I couldn't figure out why we had to take a blanket to school. And so, okay, it's nap time, so we all laid down, and I thought she was kidding. I never took a nap. Who ever took a nap? You miss out on something. So I laid there, and I was there about 3 minutes, and I pretended to snore like I was and pretended to snore, and pretty soon I saw those sturdy Oxfords coming through the chairs. Philip, this is serious, and if you want to take your nap in the hall, you're welcome to. Okay, all right. So I pretended to sleep, and then I fell asleep. So that was that. But Beulah Klein was a good teacher, one of the old school teachers. And we had wonderful teachers. And that was at a time where teachers were not allowed to go into any of the establishments that sold alcohol. You know, you were never allowed, not even a restaurant. You weren't supposed. They did do their Christmas party occasionally at the Brush and Palette in the dining room area there, but that was about it. And so that was the school system was, we really had wonderful teachers. Grace Cardwell was my second grade teacher, and she was a wonderful teacher. Her and her husband, Fox Cardwell, owned the freezer plant where if you couldn't afford a freezer in your home, you could take your food there, your meats there, and rent freezer space. And then if you needed a roast, you'd go there during the day, and they'd bring it out to you. And that was how people got along with a freezer back in the 50s, is how that happened. When Grace Cardwell, they went to Florida to live, and they got word that Grace Cardwell had died. So Betty Okoski sent Fox a sympathy card. And a few days later, she got a message back, and it said, Betty, thank you for the sympathy card, but I'm very much alive. Love, Grace. She hadn't died at all. So that's the way that went. I think when we look at some of the things that the garages in town did, like Owen Schooley sold cars. We had two 53 Chevys that we bought, because that's all we could afford. We were poor people, all we could afford. And they were quite expensive. They were $75. And we got to pay for them over a year. And for $75, we got to drive a car for 2 or 3 years. And of course, those old cars, the floorboards would rust out after a while. So my mother would take us kids over to Speedsville, where our family is from, and my sisters would have to wear scarves tied down real tight because the dust would come up through the floorboards, and my older sister would hang her head out the window all the way over trying to get her breath because she had asthma. And but we bought our cars locally at Owen Schooley's. And Twig, when he had the garage, he got dentures at the same time my mother got dentures. And neither one of them did their dentures fit right. My mother said they're like running boards or something up the back, and she says they just gag me. I can't wear them. And Twig says, you know, I went through the same thing. He says, meet me at my house up on Lovely Vale, up in the honey pot there, and I'll fix your teeth, because I fixed mine. So she drove up to Twig's house that night, and he got into his garage and got his grindstone going, and ground her teeth down and kept fitting them to her until they fit right. She never had problems with her teeth after that. So Twig was also a dentist besides a mechanic. So that's that story there. And Don Ackla, whenever a kid had a flat tire on his bike, they would take the bike over to Don Ackla's, and he would get out his repair kit, and he would sort of rough off where the hole was in the inner tube, and put some stuff on it, and then take out his lighter and light it. And I thought, my God, he's gonna burn up my inner tube. And I'll never be able to ride my bike again, and I have a paper route, I need my bike. And so then he put a patch on it, and it was a hot patch, it was called. And you could ride that for a long, long time after that, and my inner tubes probably had 10 or 12 patches on it. But he kept us kids in bicycles for a long, long time. His father, Bert Ackla, lived across the street from the gas station, and he plowed gardens for people. He had a small tractor with a plow on. He'd go out and plow gardens for people all spring long, and call Bert Ackla, he'll plow your garden for you. And sure enough, he did, and so did Andy Consalvi. He had a plow and a tractor, and he would plow gardens up for us, and did a lot of things. And I think that back then it was just simple living. I think that we didn't worry about things too much. I do remember that most of the families around us had chickens. We had a pig every year, and we would raise the pig, and one pig we got so we could ride, and one pig got out and it took the whole neighborhood all day to catch it, so we named him Runaway. And every fall this time of the year, my mother would take us kids for a ride in the old car, and we'd come home and the fence to the pigsty would be down. And my mother would say, "Oh no, must be the pig got out." And then 2 weeks later, they would bring these bushel baskets full of wrapped meat into the house. And they thought we didn't know that was our pig in the basket. But it was. And every fall we made sauerkraut and salt pork and, and all the things that made life interesting and made life fun. I remember the first phone I ever saw. We never had a phone till I was 16 and had a job and could afford a phone. And our neighbors had a phone, one of the crank phones that you had to stand up on a chair to talk on. And I think their number was like 2 longs and a short, which I never figured out how that went. I guess a long was all the way around, and a short was halfway around or something like that. And there was 16 party lines back then, and our most noted person in town for party lines was Piney Strong, and that's where she got all her information. And Karina and I would go up to get milk up at Strong's. We'd go in, and often Piney'd be sound asleep in her chair in the corner with her phone nestled in her, listening to Mary Jordan tell all the gossip up in Lovelyvale and hither and yon. And so those were wonderful days that you didn't need internet because you had a party line. And you could just sit there and relax and enjoy the other conversations. And it was just a lot of fun. I think one of my favorite people that I worked with at the store at Johnny's, and she worked every job. Her husband went through a bankruptcy for his engineering firm up at the Legion, where the Legion is, and that was Ted Nicholson. Ted was a wonderful woman, and she worked very, very hard. They had a daughter, Carol, who was around my age and a friend of mine. And Fred had a couple of boys, I think. Bob was one, there was another, I think. But Ted Nicholson actually had quite a history. She was actually a caddy for one of the Rockefellers at one point, a golf caddy for one of the Rockefellers at one point. And I loved to hear her tell those stories. And it is just fascinating. And she used to tell me some of the craziest stories. And the crazy part of it was they were all true and all believable as far as that goes. You know, the house I live in has a wonderful history. It's a huge house for me and my dog, but I do love it. And there's an elevator in it. And the reason there's an elevator that Dr. Amos Canfield opened the house in 1906 as a summer home. He lived in New York City, and he was a neurosurgeon in New York City. And he had a summer home where the Edge of Time bed and breakfast was. And this is told to me by Eva May. And the house was built in 1860 by a general in the Civil War who wanted his family, he was from Massachusetts, I think, he wanted his family to be all in one place where he thought it might be safe from the Confederates and from the war itself. And so in 1906, Dr. Canfield bought the house and renovated the whole thing. The tiles in the upstairs bathroom were imported from Italy. There's leaded glass on the porch that one end has the history of America, where there's Native Americans and there's pilgrims, all done in leaded glass. The other end is the history of transportation with airplanes and stagecoaches and trains, and it's really quite fascinating. I'll be decorating for Christmas. I do 9 Christmas trees, by the way. And so I hope to, at one point, have some sort of an open house. And but the person who did the artwork for the stained glass windows, his name was Lahamadou. And there's a Lahamadou Street in Montour Falls, so I think he might have come from there. But I wrote Corning Glass because he was an artist for Carter Glass, which became Corning Glass. And so I wrote to Corning Glass Archives, and I never got an answer from them, but I'm going to write again because I would like to find out more about him and the history. And so anyway, Dr. Canfield named it Canfield Gardens. And he was a neurosurgeon, and he got to be close friends with one of his patients, and the patient would come there, and he was in a wheelchair, so he couldn't get upstairs. That's where the bedrooms and bathrooms were. So he put in an elevator, which is still there. I haven't tried the elevator because I think I'm too heavy for it, but the guest that he had was Franklin Roosevelt, that he was Franklin Roosevelt's doctor. And so supposedly the brass bed I have, we call it the president's room, and the brass bed I have, supposedly FDR has been in that bed. So if anyone wants to come in and go to bed with me in the president's bed, you're more than welcome. Okay, so that's that story. But there's so much interesting things in this town that, you know, houses that were part of the Underground Railroad. You know, I believe that the Halstead House up the Ithaca Road was part of the Underground Railroad. Bill Thomas owned that house at one time as a tenant farmhouse, and I believe that was part of the Underground Railroad, and how they brought people up in privacy and sort of saved their lives and gave them a new start. And looking back on those things show us how America was built, you know, and we need to go back to those things. We need to go back to that camaraderie. I remember as a kid that we all thought our church was the only way to God, but we respected everybody else's church. And now there's competition, there's just competition. And that isn't healthy. We all gotta live together. We all have different ideas, different opinions. Look at the people that I just mentioned tonight that have touched my life. And there's so many people here in this room that you've all touched my life. And I hope I've touched your life in a very good way. The cemetery walks that I do, I just love going through there and reminiscing, because those people all meant so much to me. I think of my old friend Ida Twilliger, and that's Twig's wife, and what a tyrant she could be when you never knew when she was coming towards you, whether she liked you or hated you. But she was a wonderful person, and she was just a real scrapper. She was such a great gal. And Rosie Olmsted, very special person in my life. We were poor people, and these people looked out. We all looked out for each other. The Shaler family lived around the corner from me, and when I was 14, their son Chucky, who was 16, got viral pneumonia and died. And he was a friend of ours, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna die too. Because you're at that age where you think, oh my God, if he died, I could. But the Shalers were poor people too. But they all went on and did something well with their life. They did good. And they did the best they could. And they discovered some of their Native American heritage. Their grandmother lived to be 110 years old. And she was a Native American woman. And at the cemetery walk, David's wife came and gave me a leather pouch that she had made that you can carry your sage in and stuff for services and things. And they've done some of the Native American funerals at the end of my funerals that I've done. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's what growing up in Candor is all about. And all these people are notable people. Art Beebe. Every election, my dad would go up and vote Democrat. And Art Beebe would come down and get my mother to come up secretly because she was a Republican. And he would come and get her to vote to cancel out my father's vote. And that's what Art Beebe was all about. Myron Miller, the funeral director, always was crazy. He did his grandson, Tommy Ward, was one of my best friends. We worked at Johnny's store together, and he just did crazy, crazy things, Myron did. And I remember, I told this, I think, at the cemetery walk, that I would go to collect for papers at Ellis's drugstore, and an hour and a half later, Carmen Ellis would be done asking me questions about all the people on my paper route and trying to get all the dirt. And Carmen always wore bright red lipstick way up around here and like this. And when she died, my friend Corinne called me at college and said, Carmen Ellis died. I said, oh my God, what did she die of? Overdose of lipstick. So, I went in one day and Stuart Ellis says, did you hear what happened last night? And I says, no. He says, well, Myron Miller went out at midnight on a pickup. He had a removal. He pulled in, and he was pulling the stretcher out of the back of the hearse, and it got away from him. And the driveway is right across from their front door, he says, and that the casket was on the car. It came all the way across the road and right through my front door. And I says, and he's yelling, Myron's running behind it yelling, stop that coughing, stop that coughing. And so Doc Ellis, I said, what did you do? He says, I handed him a bottle of cough syrup. Of course, I was dumb enough and young enough that and often Mamie LaGrange, whose husband and her owned the hardware store, she would come down Saturday mornings knowing I was there, and she would get some of the dirt. And one Christmas, she gave me a silver dollar. And I've still got the silver dollar. I don't know what it's worth, but it's worth a lot to me. And she gave me that silver dollar, which back then was worth millions. And I've still got it. And I says, oh, where did you ever get this? And she says, my husband's a coin collector. He's got a lot of those things. And she says, I don't think he'll miss it. So I probably should check it out because it might be worth some money, you know. Sandy DuPois, her parents owned the IGA store and ran it for years, and Art Howell was their butcher, their meat cutter, right? And her grandparents owned the coal business at one time, right behind the food pantry here. That was Heath's Coal Company. That was a little before my time, I think. But these are the people that made Candor what it is today. You know, and one of the stories I just love is the song that was written about Candor by Harry Chapin. The mayor of Candor lied. Well, the cops always set up, or Roger Townsend was set up by the cemetery, his radar trap, and they always caught people speeding. And Harry Chapin was headed from Long Island to Cornell University to play a concert, and they caught him for speeding here in Candor. And they gave him a ticket, and he couldn't get out of the ticket. They wouldn't let him get out of the ticket. So, and they didn't know who he was Harry Chapin. You know, he was a good singer back in the 60s. And so, to get even, he wrote a song, The Mayor of Candor Lied. You know, and because the word candor, he thought, well, that should be honesty, but I don't know how honest they are. So he wrote a song, The Mayor of Candor Lied. And so there's been so many people that have crossed our path. And the one thing I enjoyed about speaking tonight is it takes me back through the better years of my life. The 50s and early 60s were some of the best years that we ever had in our world. And I believe, in my personal opinion, the day, November 22nd, 1963, when President Kennedy was shot, that changed the world. That changed our world. And I was 13 years old. I was a paper boy and so proud the Ithaca Journal carried this story because they went to press later. Binghamton Press didn't. And I still have the newspapers of that night. And I remember watching it that whole weekend. And it was also that fall that the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. And it was on a Saturday afternoon, and we had a football game. I was walking across the bridge, and I had a paper route, so I had enough money. I bought a transistor radio that could pick up as far as WEDO in Owego. And it was turquoise. I remember it was turquoise. And I got it at National Bellis Hess, a catalog company, you know. And so I'm going across the bridge, and I remember like it was this morning. We interrupt this program to bring a special bulletin that there's the Cuban Missile Crisis and possible threat of nuclear war. I ran home because I wanted to die with my family, you know, and not at a football game. And that was scary. And then I think a month later, the president was shot, and our world changed. And look at just in the last years how much our world has changed. And we just need to come back together. The small town of Candor, New York gave us a wonderful start. And the generations before us, nowadays you put your mother in the nursing home and sell her house and do all this stuff. And back home, you put mother up in a bedroom upstairs and took care of her, you know? Or if she was really bad, you went to Scoutons Nursing Home, and they took care of her. And those days need to come back, you know? I think when I was the funeral director here, and I got a call one night from a man that I didn't know, and I didn't know the woman that had died. He says, "My mom just died, have her cremated, and it's November, have her cremated, and I'll pick up her ashes next year. I'm coming for the 4th of July for the family picnic." And I bit my tongue because I wanted to say, you're talking about the woman that brought you into this world. Where's your respect? And women were mothers to all the kids on the street. Cub Scouts, Margie Ward, she was our den mother. And I can still hear us all saying, "Roar, roar, Den 4." And our competition was Helen Bardo, who her husband and her lived on Park Drive. He was a lawyer, and she was Den 2. Cock-a-doodle-doo, Den 2. Now what sounds better? Roar, roar, Den 4, or cock-a-doodle-doo, Den 2? Roar, roar, Den 4. You know, and so, you know, those are the times that certainly saved our souls, that's for sure. And we had a ball. We had some really good times. I do know a lot of uncensored stories that I can't tell, but there was.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I can't do that. But I've enjoyed living in Candor. It's been a wonderful part of my life, and I guess that's why, like the Swallows return to Capistrano, you know, we return to Candor, and that's the way it is. I do want to thank Kay for painting the picture of the dam that was auctioned off or raffled off. How much money did it bring to you?
I can't remember, it was over $1,000, which is what we wanted, and I know it was over.
Good for Kay. Kay paints a picture just about every day. So she taught me a few things, but not good. But that's wonderful. And the Historical Society is going to save Candor for the generations to
That's
come.
what we're trying to do.
I hope that the generations that come can look with favor and sentiment back on the things that we are passing on to them. Because I think that that's what's going to keep our world going. So we'll continue to try to do that. So thank you all for coming. I hope I didn't run my mouth too long, so thank you.
I grew up in a small town, and this is mindful of your wonderful presentation of where I grew up in western New York. It was a small town similar to Candor, however, it had a movie theater. And I didn't hear you mention one with all.
We did have a movie theater for a very short time. It was in the Red and White store after the Red and White store closed. And a man that came to town that went by the name General Custer, he dressed as a Civil War soldier, and he brought a movie theater in town that probably lasted 3 months maybe. It wasn't long, but it was called the Bijou Nickelodeon. So, but you had a real movie theater.
Real movie theater, and it was during the Depression, of course, and there were 5 siblings in the family, and we, as I grew to age 9, 10, that's, of course, we had to walk to the theater, we didn't have a vehicle, and on a Saturday afternoon, and they would show 2 shows, matinees, and mostly westerns at that time. But I do remember it cost 10 cents. And then we had to start paying tax, and it went to 11 cents. And I wasn't able to attend a movie only once a month after that.
The first movie I ever went to was at Tioga Theater, which was a beautiful theater, and still is, but it's been chopped up into little theaters, sort of. My mother wanted to take all of us kids, and us twins were probably 6 years old. My sister Rose was 8, my brother 4. And we went to see, the first movie we went to see was Old Yeller, which would tear your heart right out, you know, at the end when Old Yeller died. So we get in the theater and it goes through all the newsreels, you know, usually about World War II and stuff like that. And then comes the feature, and she had gotten the wrong week, so us 4 kids and my mother had to sit through The Apartment with Jack Lemmon. She loved the movie. Us kids were quite restless, but she kept trying to get us to have candy or popcorn or whatever. But then we went the next week, and she made up for it, and we got to see Old Yeller. And we all cried all the way home because Old Yeller got hydrophobia and died. So
There was in the, what most recently was the
IGA.
Candor Market, they had, upstairs, they had silent movies, and Ruth Miller would play the piano.
would play the piano, yeah. Another person I want to mention that is doing a wonderful job for Candor and should be credited for that is Chad Rose,
Yes.
who is restoring the fronts of the IGA, the Candor Courier office, it's just a liquor store now, and the Miller's Furniture Store. And he's doing a wonderful job with many places in Candor, and he's a very hard worker, and he certainly is a credit to this community, so he's doing a great job. Once again, thank you. Have a good day.